What if the world's most iconic sports brand began not in a boardroom, but in a college classroom, with a paper, a question, and a young man who loved to run? This is not just a business story. It's a story of vision, grit, and the kind of quiet beginnings that don't look like success until they become it. In the early 1960s, a young man named Phil Knight was finishing his business studies at Stanford University. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, and he didn't have a company yet. But he did have an idea. And that idea came during a class assignment that asked him to create a business plan. While others imagined big companies and complex services, Phil stayed close to what he knew. He had been a runner on the track team at the University of Oregon and knew firsthand what made a shoe good and what made it bad. He had worn the heavy German-made shoes that dominated the American market, and he believed something better was possible. So in his paper, he suggested something radical for the time: importing high-quality, low-cost running shoes from Japan to compete with the big European brands like Adidas and Puma. Japan, recovering from World War II, was beginning to produce quality goods at lower costs. Knight saw an opportunity. At the time, it was only a theory, a school paper, but Phil Knight couldn't stop thinking about it. After graduation, he traveled to Japan not as a CEO, but as a curious young man chasing a dream. He visited the offices of Onitsuka Tiger, a Japanese shoe company, and pitched them an idea: let him sell their shoes in the United States. To his surprise, they agreed. He returned home with a shipment of shoes and a need for help. That's when he turned to his old coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was more than just a coach. He was an innovator, always looking for ways to improve performance. He had experimented with modifying shoes for his athletes, sometimes even tearing them apart to rebuild them with better balance and grip. When Phil showed him the Japanese shoes, Bowerman wasn't just interested in buying a pair. He wanted to be part of the project. Together, they formed a small partnership. In 1964, Blue Ribbon Sports was born. The name didn't turn heads. It wasn't flashy or fashionable, but it held a promise: to give athletes something better. Phil Knight didn't have a fancy office. He sold shoes out of the trunk of his car, driving from track meet to track meet across the Pacific Northwest. He would open the trunk, pull out boxes, and let the shoes speak for themselves. Each sale was personal. Each customer a new chance to prove his idea had value. Bowerman, meanwhile, kept pushing the boundaries of design. He experimented with materials, shapes, and even borrowed his wife's waffle iron to create a new sole pattern that would grip the track without adding weight. That sole would become one of the most important innovations in the company's early years, and would later help define Nike's identity. But in these early days, it was all about survival. Blue Ribbon Sports was small, unknown, and running on belief more than money. Every step forward came with a risk. They faced manufacturing problems, supply delays, and the constant fear of losing their partnership with the Japanese supplier. Still, Phil kept going. Every pair sold gave them a little more ground. He worked during the day and handled orders at night. He used his parents' basement as a warehouse and ran his new business while working as an accountant. Bowerman sent notes with design ideas and improvements, focused not on style, but on speed, function, and durability. What kept them going wasn't fame or fortune. It was the belief that the athlete deserved better, and they could deliver it. Each shoe was a message: you can go farther, you can go faster, and we can help. Customers began to notice. Runners appreciated the lightness, the grip, and the care behind the product. Word spread slowly but surely. Coaches started to ask for more. Athletes recommended the shoes to friends. Phil Knight didn't know it yet, but the foundation of one of the greatest brands in history was being laid. And it all began with a simple question: what if American runners had better shoes? The answer, as it turned out, would change the world of sports forever. With Blue Ribbon Sports slowly gaining traction, Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman began to realize something important. To truly grow, they couldn't rely forever on someone else's designs. They needed their own brand. By the early 1970s, tension with their Japanese supplier was rising. Phil had noticed inconsistent shipments and delays that made it difficult to meet demand. It was time to take a leap. If they wanted to build something lasting, they would have to stop being a distributor and start being creators. In 1971, with uncertainty on the horizon, they made the bold decision to launch their own line of shoes. They needed a name, something short, powerful, and meaningful. One of Phil's first employees, Jeff Johnson, had a dream that inspired him to suggest a name from Greek mythology: Nike, the goddess of victory. The name stuck. It was easy to say, easy to remember, and it carried the spirit of sport. But a name alone wasn't enough. They needed a symbol. Phil approached a design student named Carolyn Davidson, asking her to create a logo for their new brand. She drew several options, but one stood out, a simple, curved line that suggested motion and speed. That mark would become known as the swoosh. At first, Phil wasn't in love with it. He said, "I don't love it, but maybe it will grow on me." Little did he know, it would one day become one of the most recognized logos in the world. They paid Davidson just $35 for the design. Years later, as the company grew, Phil thanked her again with a stock package that made her a millionaire. The first Nike shoes hit the market in 1972. They featured the now famous waffle sole, designed by Bowerman in his kitchen using that borrowed waffle iron. The shoe was light, grippy, and fast. It gave runners an edge, and people noticed. Nike debuted their shoes at the 1972 U.S. Olympic trials. The response was immediate. Athletes were curious, and some were impressed enough to compete in them. It wasn't just about the shoe. It was about the feeling it gave, a sense that you were wearing something designed to help you win. Sales began to grow. Coaches and athletes started asking for Nike products. Runners at colleges, high schools, and local tracks began choosing Nike over the bigger, more established brands. But competition was fierce. Adidas and Puma had money, experience, and global recognition. Nike had to find its own edge, and they did that by staying close to the athletes. They listened. They asked questions. They made changes. Bowerman constantly revised designs based on athlete feedback, always searching for ways to make shoes lighter, more durable, and more comfortable. Meanwhile, Phil built a team of passionate salespeople, people who didn't just sell shoes but believed in what the shoes stood for. Nike wasn't just offering footwear. They were building a relationship with their customer, an understanding that every runner, every player, and every person wanted to do better. That connection mattered. It became the heartbeat of the brand, and even as money was tight and problems still popped up daily, the dream continued to grow. The new company wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made. Deliveries got lost. Shoes sometimes fell apart, but the team behind Nike refused to stop. They learned, they fixed, they pushed ahead, because at the center of it all was a simple truth: they weren't just selling a product. They were selling belief. Belief that anyone with the right tools and the right mindset could run faster, jump higher, and go farther than they ever thought possible. That belief, stitched into every pair of shoes, was what made Nike more than a brand. It made them a movement in the making. By the mid-1970s, Nike was no longer just an upstart. It was a rising competitor, but it still had to prove it could stand toe-to-toe with the giants of the sports world. Nike's breakthrough didn't come from flashy endorsements or expensive campaigns, at least not at first. It came from performance, from shoes that delivered results. Athletes were drawn to Nike because of how the products felt and performed. Coaches liked how the shoes helped their teams gain an edge. But to grow, Nike needed to think bigger. They needed visibility. They needed champions, so they began carefully choosing athletes who weren't just talented but inspiring. Runners, basketball players, and everyday athletes who represented what Nike stood for: determination, risk, and discipline. By sponsoring track athletes and giving them gear to compete in, Nike got its logo into stadiums and onto podiums. Fans took notice. At the same time, the company invested in innovation. They poured energy into research and development, searching for new materials, lighter designs, and technology that made a difference. One of Nike's most revolutionary creations was the introduction of Nike Air, a cushioning technology using pressurized air in the sole of the shoe. This wasn't just marketing. It was a real difference runners could feel. In 1979, the first Nike Air Tailwind hit the market. It combined futuristic comfort with the sleek identity the brand had started to build. Nike was beginning to master both sides of the game, form and function. As more athletes started performing in Nike gear, the brand's visibility grew. Television coverage helped too. People didn't just hear about Nike, they saw it. By the early 1980s, Nike had become the top-selling athletic shoe brand in the United States. But their biggest moment was still ahead. A partnership that would not only change Nike, but reshape the sports and marketing industries forever. In 1984, Nike took a massive risk. They signed a young, unproven rookie basketball player, Michael Jordan. At the time, Jordan hadn't played a single professional game. Other companies passed on him. Nike believed in him. They created a custom shoe line just for him. The Air Jordan, it was bold, it was stylish, And it was banned by the NBA for not matching uniform color rules, which only made it more popular. The Air Jordan line exploded. People lined up for shoes. Kids copied Jordan's moves. Adults wore the sneakers as fashion statements. The partnership redefined what a sports brand could be. It wasn't just about gear, it was about identity. Nike became the brand of ambition, swagger, and performance. Sales soared. The swoosh became more than a logo, it became a symbol of excellence. Nike learned an important lesson. When you align with greatness, you rise with it. They began investing more in storytelling. Their ads became mini-movies. Their athletes became icons. But through all the flash and fame, they held onto a simple core idea: inspire people to move. Whether it was on the court, the track, or the street, Nike wanted people to believe in their own potential. And slowly, belief turned into loyalty. Nike wasn't just a product anymore. It was a part of how people saw themselves. In 1988, Nike released a campaign that would change the way people saw advertising, athletics, and ambition. 3 words, simple and unforgettable: just do it. Those words weren't just a slogan, they were a mindset. A challenge, a call to action. At the time, Nike was already successful, but competition was fierce. Reebok was rising fast, capturing market share with flashy aerobic shoes and trendy style. Nike needed something bigger, not just a product, but a message that would resonate with everyone, not just elite athletes. They hired a creative team from the advertising agency Whedon plus Kennedy. The team looked for a phrase that could unite all kinds of movement, all kinds of people. The result was just do it. In the first ad, an 80-year-old man jogs across the Golden Gate Bridge. He runs every day, no excuses. No medals, just purpose. That ad said everything Nike wanted people to believe. That greatness wasn't limited to stadiums or contracts. It lived in action. Soon, more ads followed, each one different. A teenager shooting hoops alone on a neighborhood court. A mother running before sunrise. A boxer training in a quiet gym. Nike's athletes weren't perfect. They weren't always winners, but they were trying, moving, doing. And that's what made the slogan powerful. It spoke to everyone from pro athletes to people putting on sneakers for the first time. It said, no matter your past, your fears, or your limits, just start. Just try, just do it. The campaign was bold. It didn't just sell shoes, it sold belief. Sales skyrocketed, Nike's global recognition soared. People began quoting the slogan in speeches, in schools, in daily conversation. Just do it became more than advertising. It became culture. And with this cultural rise came even more bold decisions. Nike began choosing athletes who represented more than talent. They chose people who stood for something. They partnered with athletes who had stories, who faced adversity, who overcame setbacks, who made statements. Serena Williams, Tiger Woods, Bo Jackson. They were icons in their fields, but they were also symbols of grit and individuality. Nike ads featured their struggles, not just their success. They showed tears, failure, exhaustion, the moments where quitting was easier but not chosen. That honesty built trust. Nike was telling the world, it's not about being perfect. It's about trying anyway. The brand expanded its influence into music, fashion, and streetwear. Sneakers became statements. Tracksuits became trends, and everywhere that swoosh carried meaning. You didn't wear Nike just because it was good. You wore it because it meant something. That shift from product to identity pushed Nike into new territory. They weren't just outfitting athletes. They were inspiring individuals. The message was clear: if you have a body, you are an athlete. With Just Do It, Nike gave the world permission to try. And in doing so, they reached beyond sport, into culture, into art, into the hearts of millions. As Nike's global influence grew, so did the scrutiny. By the 1990s, the company had reached the top of the sportswear world, but it now faced challenges that couldn't be ignored. The brand that had inspired millions with words like, "Just do it," was now under fire for how and where its products were made. Reports began surfacing about poor working conditions in factories overseas, long hours, low pay, and unsafe environments. Activists and journalists accused Nike of turning a blind eye to labor violations, especially in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and China. The backlash was sharp. Protests erupted. College campuses boycotted. Public trust began to slip. For a company that had built its image on strength and ethics, this was a critical moment. Nike's leaders had to face hard truths. They had grown quickly, but had lost control over some of their supply chain practices. The world expected more, and Nike had to decide whether to fight the criticism or fix the problem. They chose to change. Nike increased oversight in its factories, raised standards, and published reports on labor conditions. They hired independent auditors and created a code of conduct for suppliers. For the first time, they released a full list of factories they worked with, a move few brands had ever made. These changes didn't come overnight. But step by step, Nike worked to rebuild trust. They invested in corporate responsibility. They shifted from damage control to long-term change. They also began addressing sustainability. With growing concern over environmental impact, Nike launched programs to reduce waste and use more sustainable materials. The brand introduced Nike Grind, a recycling initiative turning old shoes and manufacturing scrap into playgrounds, courts, and new gear. Through setbacks, Nike learned that real leadership means listening and evolving. They began embracing transparency not just as strategy, but as value. Meanwhile, the world around them was changing. Consumers wanted more than products. They wanted principles. Nike responded by standing beside athletes who spoke out, not only in competition, but in culture. When Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem to protest racial injustice, the moment divided America. Many brands stayed silent. Nike didn't. They featured Kaepernick in a powerful ad campaign with the words, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." It sparked controversy. Some burned their shoes, but many more bought in. Nike stood by its message. They believed purpose could be profitable and right. Their stance sent a signal. This brand does not fear bold moves. From environmental efforts to social activism, Nike learned to walk its talk. The company that once faced global criticism had now become a voice in some of the biggest conversations of our time. And while no company is perfect, Nike had shown its ability to reflect, to grow, and to lead not just in markets, but in moments that matter. Today, Nike is more than a sportswear brand. It is a cultural force, a symbol of motion, ambition, and transformation. The company that began in a car trunk has grown into a global empire with stores in every major city and influence in every corner of sport and style. Its success doesn't come only from the shoes it sells, but from the stories it tells, stories of grit, risk, and rising after the fall. Nike continues to invest in technology and innovation. From self-lacing sneakers to app-connected gear, the brand pushes the limits of what athletic wear can be. Their research labs explore biomechanics, testing how bodies move and how gear can enhance performance with precision. At the same time, Nike builds community. It supports local athletes, funds youth sports programs, and empowers women in sport through major campaigns and sponsorships. It remains deeply connected to its roots in running, but has grown to shape basketball, football, tennis, skateboarding, and streetwear culture. Collaborations with designers, artists, and musicians have made Nike a creative hub as much as an athletic one. Shoes like the Air Max, Vaporfly, and new generations of Air Jordans are not just performance gear, they're collectibles, cultural currency. Nike understands something vital. People want to move, but they also want to belong. With that in mind, Nike continues to align with voices that represent change. Whether it's celebrating women's empowerment with Serena Williams, racial equity with LeBron James, or LGBTQ+ inclusion, Nike doesn't just reflect the world, it helps shape it. The company also leans into digital experience. Nike Training Club and Nike Run Club apps offer coaching, community, and connection for millions of users. E-commerce, customization, and sustainability are central to its strategy. With Nike by You, customers can create personalized shoes. With Move to Zero, Nike commits to reducing carbon emissions and waste. Each decision, each product, and each message circles back to one core mission: inspire human potential. What started as a dream in a college classroom became a global symbol because it stayed committed to motion, to pushing forward when others stopped. Nike's journey proves that success is never final. It must be earned every day with ideas, with integrity, and with belief. The swoosh is now stitched not only into fabric but into history, because Nike did more than build a brand. It built a movement. And it all began with a simple idea: give people something better and the courage to chase what they thought was out of reach. Just do it. Not just a slogan, a way of life. Nike's success didn't come from shortcuts. It came from daring to move, daring to fail, and daring to believe. Through setbacks and controversy, through vision and reinvention, Nike proved that greatness isn't born, it's built. From track fields to world stages, from startup to global powerhouse, their story is a reminder. The only way forward is to keep going. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story inspired you, let us know in the comments. What does just do it mean to you? And remember, big dreams start small, just like Nike did.